Hi guys, and this is Jeff. I keep saying this every single video, but it has really been a while, and yes, I'm actually back on YouTube. If you're new to this channel, just a quick introduction of myself. I'm a Hong Konger who is currently living in Sydney, Australia. I'm just your normal, typical salaryman who occasionally vlogs. So if you want to jump right into the topic of this video, then feel free to go to this timestamp. But if you have been following me for quite a while, you're probably wondering what has happened to me in the past 2+ years. I didn't post content as often as I first started out in my first year. So probably you're like, what the hell has happened? So here's a quick update and a bit of a self-reflection time for myself. So the main one would be I was switching jobs. After the first year on YouTube, I spent a lot of time finding a new job and prepping for job interviews because I was basically not happy in my previous role. But lucky that I made it happen and I am in a much happier place now. So another thing is to take a break to see where I stand in this YouTube world and to recalibrate myself. Because I will admit it here, so initially when I first started YouTube, I hated my corporate job and I saw this as a ticket to get out of the corporate world, so that I tried so hard to get as many subscribers as I can, so that hopefully one day I could get out of the corporate world and be a full-time YouTuber. But this clearly backfired because by the end of the first year as I was running this YouTube channel, I was burnt out. So I really had to take a step back to rethink what ignites my inner spark and what made me started my YouTube channel in the first place, apart from getting out of the corporate world. So this is pretty much a quick status update from me. And what else happened? Before I get into this, maybe I will give you guys a bit of a heads up, because this part of the video will get a little bit deep and heavy. So with the events that are happening around the world, I fell into a bit of an existential crisis. I'm not even exaggerating. So I keep thinking to myself, who exactly am I? So I'm aware that my ancestors are from China and I was born in Hong Kong, and right now I've already spent 1/3 of my life in Australia and I'm pretty well settled here too. I'm gonna put it out there. With all these events that are happening, I form my own opinions based on what I see too. For example, during the beginning of the pandemic, I think stigmatizing the Chinese population and calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus is wrong. And I also value social stability and harmony over unnecessary division and chaos, which I actually still have those videos on my YouTube channel, so if you guys are curious, you guys can check it out. With that, to put it in a nicer way, I actually had some chances to interact with people from different walks of life, and obviously not everyone is gonna agree with you, which I totally respect that. There are always differences in opinions because we are individual. We all have our own thinking and form our opinions based on our own experience after all, which I totally appreciate that. But on certain occasions, I got some backlashes, so I would group that into several main themes to tell you what are the things that I've been told. So the first thing that I keep hearing is, check your privilege for living in Australia. Like seriously, are you for real? How ignorant can one be to say things like that? When any immigrants to a new country, they will have to go through so many struggles overseas. And a lot of the time, they face these struggles on their own, without the support of their family and friends. But they still manage to work their way up to strive for a more comfortable life for themselves. And here comes this person having the audacity to say, check your privilege. So I think to myself, do I not deserve to live here, despite all the hard work that I've put in and contributed to the society that I'm living in over the years? Really, this statement basically implies that you need to be less Asian/Chinese and to eradicate the beliefs that you have in order to fit into the mainstream narrative that everyone tends to follow in order to deserve a spot in Australia. How does that make any sense? So the second thing that I keep hearing is, don't even dare to call yourself a Hong Konger. You're definitely not one of us. So what am I? Even though I was born and raised in Hong Kong, I'm not a Hong Konger. Okay. So my question is, for a city that brands itself to be so open-minded and accepting, since when we are so intolerant of people forming different opinions than yourself? And the last one, I actually get this a lot. Why don't you go back to China? Why are you still in Australia? China is a much better country for you, winky face. And since I actually brought up this topic, might as well do a bit of a deep dive into Chinese culture and identity in this modern world right now. To go back to the statement that I just mentioned, why don't you go back to China? This statement is actually very problematic. How come when words like Chinese or China, when these words are used in a sentence, they always somehow carry some sort of negative connotations?
Go back to China. Go back.
Thank you.
Go back to China.
So why don't you go back to China where you grew up?
We're in China.
To be honest, there are just so many examples you can find in news commentary, social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc, etc. To be honest, there are billions of people living in China, and in addition to that, there are millions and millions of Chinese diasporas scattered over the world. Is there something wrong with them? Think about it. When someone is trying to tell you, why don't you go back to China? They are obviously saying that to make you upset. At the same time, but taking a step back, I mean, I understand because I've been there. I've only held negative views towards my Chinese roots and culture when I was a kid as well. Growing up in Hong Kong as a 90s kid, wow, I'm actually exposing my age here, hey. I kind of saw Hong Kong culture and Chinese culture, they are actually completely separate from each other. I have always been taught that Hong Kong is a place where the East meets West because of the British colonial past. But only as I learned more about the history of Hong Kong myself, like when I was a kid, I totally was unaware of the fact that Hong Kong was actually a migrant city of people from different regions of China. But as a young kid, this part of the migrant history on how these Chinese migrants actually shaped Hong Kong into the city that we are seeing right now, and their contributions to this city, like this part of the history is often ignored. And your ancestry is actually barely brought up in your day-to-day life and education. So first and foremost, you are actually identified as a Hong Konger, or as we say in Cantonese, 香港人. So that the people in the city, including myself, actually started to feel this disconnection with our roots. This is technically not wrong because you were born and raised in the city, and of course it is completely fine to identify yourself as a Hong Konger, which I'm definitely one too. But being raised in Hong Kong, you're somehow immersed in an environment that reinforces these ideas. You are constantly told that Chinese culture is backwards and repressive, and Chinese people are rude, cunning, and uncivilized, and Chinese products are often in bad quality. I mean, back in the 90s, 2000s, there is certain truth to these statements, but the problem is this often shows only one side of the coin but not the other, and we are only focusing on the negatives. This sort of perception really ingrained in me since I was a kid, and because of this negative sentiment that I held, I had absolutely zero interest in learning where my ancestors came from. When I was young, my parents often suggested me to go to my ancestral hometown in mainland China in order to learn more about my cultural roots and also my own family as well. But as a kid, of course, I would refuse to do that. But thinking back, if it was like a 10-year-old Jeff or like a 15-year-old Jeff, I was glad that they didn't force me to go back to China. But as I grew older, especially as an adult right now, I realized these are the missed opportunities that I didn't take to learn more about the past of my family, which is really a shame because up until this point, I didn't really have a chance to visit my ancestral hometown. There was even one day that I told my mom, why was I born Chinese? My life would be so much happier and easier if I am not Chinese. Like after hearing all the things that I just said, which kid would want to be seen as inferior? Even in your day-to-day life, you saw it with your own eyes that people of other cultural backgrounds are being treated better than your own. So I'm talking about Hong Kong, not Australia. I wanted to be treated better than how I am being treated right now. Why would you want to be Chinese? And that is how the mind of a kid works. Therefore, as a kid or even as a teenager, it was really hard for me to identify myself with my cultural roots. So back into the mind of like a 10-year-old Jeff, 15-year-old Jeff, if I can't change my skin color or the way that I look, at least I can make a conscious choice to disassociate myself with this part of the identity that I disliked about myself, right? The irony is that only as I arrived in Australia, which is miles away from my hometown, only then that I started to get a bit more warmed up towards my own culture and my own roots. For example, I would admit that my Mandarin command is pretty shit. Back in Hong Kong, like you will always hear stories about mainland Chinese tourists or mainland Chinese immigrants. They don't want to speak Cantonese and they would just speak in Mandarin to the locals in a pretty abrupt and rude way, which rubs the locals off in a wrong way, which I totally understand. But from my interactions with my mainland Chinese friends here, I would have thought they would discriminate me because my Mandarin command isn't that great. But this is totally not the case. They are actually pretty accommodating and they do not mind myself speaking English to them. And I generally think they really respect these cultural differences and they will never make me feel uncomfortable just because of the language barriers that I face with them. And whenever I've been invited to a Chinese household for a meal, I've only been warmly welcomed with some of the most amazing homemade Chinese dishes. Oh wow, that is making me very hungry. And let's not forget the variety of the Chinese food that you get here. Like how could you not fall in love with it, right? So for me, back to the comments that I received before, rather than sulking into the negative emotions and engaging in pointless arguments that would never come to a conclusion, it really prompted me to rethink, what does it mean to be a Hong Kong Chinese in Australia? As I get more chances to interact with my own community in Sydney, this is also the reason why I would like to explore my Chinese roots a little bit deeper in this city and to tell the story of my culture and my roots based on what I see and experience through my own eyes. Being in a unique position of growing up in the East but living in the West for a substantial amount of time, so going back to that privilege statement, at the same time I know I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in right now, because I realize not everyone will have the exposure that I have across different cultures and experiences, and in that sense, I acknowledge my privilege because this really shaped how I feel the world in a very different way. It is a bit of a bold statement, but I will put it out there. I would like to be the bridge between the two cultures to facilitate the understanding between the East and the West through storytelling, and to represent the culture that I grew up with in a more positive light. At the same time, there is no point of forcing a certain label on a group of people purely based on their physical characteristics or the place that they were born or currently living in. But for me, I want to make an impact, to make people feel more confident or even proud to wear this cultural badge if they choose to. And of course, to represent Chinese culture in a more positive light, no matter where they are located in this world. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Lastly, let's get down to the nitty-gritty details. I want to set myself some realistic goals, so hopefully I can actually follow through. I will try to upload videos twice a month, so that is what I'm trying to achieve. If I could do more, I would. So let's hope I could keep this up and hold myself accountable. And I promise my future videos and vlogs will be more lighthearted than this intro slash update video. And of course, yes, I will kick off with some food vlogs. So if you get to this point of the video, wow, thank you so much for listening to me. I don't really know why you're listening to me rambling all this time, so thank you so much. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.